Russia began its invasion of Ukraine, but first, real quick, none of the footage shown will be of the conflict. Everything is of previous military exercises and war games. War is ugly, and I'd rather avoid showing it directly. In the early hours of February 24th, we saw large-scale strikes launched. Those were just the beginning of the war though, what is often referred to today as shock and awe. The objective is to destroy, as much as possible, Ukraine's air defenses, as well as their air force by hitting air bases so they can't take off. Doing this will give Russia control of the sky. That way they can send in fighter bombers and attack aircraft and helicopters to help fight the land war virtually unopposed. And secondly, they also hit Ukraine's military command and control centers. This makes it significantly more difficult for Ukraine's military to mount any counterattacks or even any organized defense against Russian ground forces. The problem is, unlike the US, Russia does not have large stockpiles of PGMs, or precision-guided munitions. And while Ukraine is still a fraction of the size of Russia, there are still hundreds, possibly even thousands of high-value targets that they would like to destroy. For example, in the 2003 US invasion of Iraq, who arguably had a much weaker military, the US still launched over 800 Tomahawk cruise missiles along with hundreds of precision airstrikes, something that Russia doesn't have the arsenal to do. And to be clear, the situation is rapidly changing, but as of writing this, there's still likely a large percentage of Ukraine's military still standing. However, whether or not the majority of that military will stay and fight is another matter. Regardless, what will come next is the ground war for Ukraine, and eventually the capital, Kiev. But first, a real unique sponsor, Kamikoto Knives. These Japanese steel knives are meticulously handcrafted with traditional techniques and expertise, building upon more than 800 years of legacy. Kamikoto uses only steel sourced from Japan, ensuring the best quality of each knife, and each one takes years to finish, going through a rigorous 19-step process, after which each is carefully and individually inspected to make sure each is top quality. And to back all this up, they come with a lifetime guarantee. Their single bevel edge makes them unbelievably sharp, meaning you can even cut through a ribeye steak like butter. And they can easily maintain their edge with Kamikoto's sharpening whetstones. For all these reasons, Kamikoto knives are used by chefs across the world. And finally, each set comes with this beautiful, but also heavy-duty ashwood box, which also makes them perfect as a gift for friends or family. I got my box here, and it's really elegant. The knives really feel great, well-crafted, and balanced. And I tested them out, and they work perfectly. So go over and check them out now. Click the link down in the description. With it, my viewers get an extra $50 off any purchase they make with the discount code COVERTCABAL. So again, check them out. Kamikoto Knives. After opening strikes, Russia began its ground operations on a large scale. The last several months of building up forces, from Crimea to the eastern borders of Ukraine to Belarus, Russia has positioned itself to attack across multiple fronts. The goal is to seize key cities as quickly as possible. Those include Odessa, Mariupol, Kharkiv, and most importantly, the capital, Kiev. If and when Russia does gain control over those cities, Ukraine will have little hopes of regaining them. Some of these will be easier than others for Russia. For example, Mariupol, which is located the closest to those Russian-backed separatist regions. Kharkiv is also located only a few dozen kilometers away from the Russian border, where we've seen a lot of troops built up. Odessa is further away, however its proximity to Crimea, where Russia built up a lot more forces, along with it being a port city, lending itself to the possibility of an amphibious assault. Kiev is a bit trickier. It's landlocked and more centralized. However, it's still only about 100 kilometers away from Belarus, another location that Russia had built up forces. For Ukraine, losing their capital would be a big deal, and could possibly bring about a quicker end to the war. Many in the Ukrainian military could see further fighting as being futile and a lost cause. So, for Ukraine to hold on, Kiev is vital. From Russia's side, they have a few options to take the city. First, since they mostly now have control of the skies, an option will be deploying the VDV, Russia's airborne forces. A few problems with this though. First, they can only really deploy lighter vehicles. Also, they have to drop from a low altitude, which puts them in range of manpads. But it does appear that Russia did try to land some troops at least at one airport just 20 kilometers outside Kiev. But, as I said, without support and heavy armor, those units could be easily defeated. And in fact, later in the day, the Ukrainian army did claim that they did this and retook the airport. The other option is a ground offensive. In the weeks leading up to the invasion, Russia built up tens of thousands of troops in Belarus. From there are two possible routes to Kiev, separated by the Dnieper River, one to the east, the other to the west. To better guarantee success, Russia would like to be able to attack the city from multiple fronts, which would make the defenders' job much more difficult. So far, at the time of writing this, we've seen Russian forces advanced furthest on the western side of the Dnieper, and they have reportedly taken control of Chernobyl. The Battle of Kiev could be costly for Russia. Urban warfare is not pretty. Kiev is a huge city, about 840 square kilometers and almost 3 million people. There are many houses and buildings where Ukrainian infantry can hide in, waiting around corners, popping out of windows or from rooftops, and shooting RPGs and javelins into the vulnerable sides and tops of Russian tanks. In fact, Russia faced this same tactic in Grozny in the mid-1990s, where RPG teams fired from rooftops. The top armor of many T-72s is reported to be anywhere from only 50 to 150 millimeters thick. Compare that to the frontal armor of the model 1989 being roughly 1,200 millimeters against heat warheads, so much thinner. One real interesting thing we've seen is field modification cage armor that sits on top of the tank. This appears to be meant to mitigate ATGMs like Javelin's effectiveness. Just how much this quick modification helps though is unknown, but likely not that much. And Russia has to worry about the skies here too, as Ukraine has thousands of manpads. With these weapons, any close air support from Su-24s, 25s, and helicopters like the Kh-52s will be vulnerable to being shot down. With these weapons, combined with insurgent-like tactics, Ukraine can make seizing Kiev a nightmare for Russia, and likely cost a lot more than it anticipated. From Russia's side, their goal would be to seize control of government buildings, such as the Verkhovna Rada building, for example, which houses Ukraine's parliament. That, as well as taking control of media and broadcasting in the city to help shape the narrative. With that done, they'd have to begin clearing the remaining forces out street by street. The big question is how determined Ukrainian forces will be to continue fighting. As I've mentioned many times in previous videos, you can have the most advanced and capable weaponry in the world, but without trained and motivated personnel behind it, it's worthless. In a war such as this, it's not hard to imagine morale quickly vanishing, as they will be outgunned, attacked on multiple fronts simultaneously, the enemy controlling the skies above, and little hope of victory. And that there will likely determine how long the war lasts. The US and others have stated they will not intervene, and sanctions have not stopped Russia, so how long they can hold on, be it days, maybe a few weeks, or, most optimistically for Ukraine, long enough to make the war not worth the cost for Russia and hopefully give up.